She thought she was flying across the world for love, but what waited for her in the frozen mountains of Canada was a nightmare she could never have imagined. When a young woman followed her charming fiancé to Vancouver, she believed she was beginning a new life, but deep in the woods, she would uncover his darkest secret and fight to escape a fate buried beneath the snow. Clara Mendoza had always dreamed of seeing the world beyond the crowded streets of Manila. When she met Daniel Whitmore online, it felt like destiny. He was charming, polite, and spoke with a gentleness that made her feel safe. He told her about his life in Vancouver, a photographer who spent his days exploring mountains and lakes, surrounded by beauty and peace. After a year of late-night calls and promises of forever, Daniel proposed. He wanted her to come to Canada and start a new life together. The thought filled her with both excitement and fear, but love won. She said goodbye to her family, promising to return soon as a married woman. The day she landed in Vancouver, the air felt crisp and foreign. Daniel was waiting at the arrival's gate, taller than she remembered, his dark jacket and quiet smile somehow colder than the warmth she had known through a screen. He hugged her, but it felt quick, almost distracted. The car ride was long, passing endless stretches of forest and snow-covered fields. Clara pressed her face against the window, expecting to see the bright city lights she had imagined, but the world outside only grew darker. When they stopped at a small gas station, Daniel told her the apartment in the city wasn't ready yet. He said they'd stay in a cabin for a few days, just the two of them. She nodded, trusting him, though a small voice inside whispered that something wasn't right. By the time they reached the cabin, night had swallowed the road behind them. The trees loomed tall and silent. As she stepped out of the car, the only sound was the wind brushing against the branches, carrying a chill that made her heart uneasy. The cabin stood alone at the edge of a frozen lake, its roof heavy with snow and windows fogged from the inside. Clara tried to smile when Daniel carried her suitcase inside, insisting it was cozy, but the silence that filled the place was unsettling. The walls were lined with old photographs of landscapes, mountains, rivers, misty forests, but not a single picture of people. A wood stove burned in the corner, casting flickering shadows across the room. Daniel told her there was no internet or phone signal, but it would be a nice digital detox. She tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. The next morning, Clara woke to find Daniel already outside, chopping wood. His movements were sharp and hurried, his face tense. She offered to help, but he told her to stay inside, saying the cold could make her sick. Hours passed before he returned, his clothes damp and his expression distant. He spoke little during meals, staring at the window as if listening to something beyond the walls. At night, Clara heard strange noises, the creak of the porch, the faint crunch of footsteps on the snow. When she mentioned it, Daniel dismissed her worries, saying it was probably animals. She noticed how he always double-checked the locks before bed and how his eyes seemed to follow the shadows near the door. The peaceful getaway he had promised began to feel like a cage. On the third day, she tried walking down the narrow road leading away from the cabin, but the path curved into the woods and disappeared. The trees seemed to close in around her, whispering with the wind. She turned back quickly, breath heavy and heart pounding. When she returned, Daniel was watching from the window, his face unreadable. The days in the cabin began to blend into one another, each one colder and quieter than the last. Daniel no longer smiled the way he used to. He spent hours sitting at the wooden table, scribbling in a notebook filled with sketches and strange symbols Clara didn't recognize. When she asked what he was working on, he only said it was for a project and quickly closed the pages. The warmth that had once filled their conversations was gone, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed against the air. Clara tried to keep herself busy, cooking, cleaning, reading old magazines she found in a drawer, but nothing eased the growing tension. Sometimes Daniel disappeared into the forest without saying where he was going. He would return after sunset, his boots muddy, his jacket dusted with snow. He never explained what he had been doing. The isolation began to weigh on Clara. There was no cell signal, no neighbors, and the road out was buried under thick snow. At night, she could hear Daniel pacing from room to room while she lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. One evening, she noticed him watching her reflection in the window. His expression was blank, almost as if he didn't recognize her. When she asked if something was wrong, He muttered that everything was fine but avoided her gaze. Later that night, she discovered that he had started locking the door from the outside before leaving each morning. He claimed it was to keep her safe from wild animals, but deep down she knew it was something else. Fear began to take root in her chest. She realized she was no longer a guest in Daniel's world. She was a prisoner in it, trapped in the silence he refused to explain. Clara's unease turned into quiet suspicion when she noticed a small study tucked behind the cabin's kitchen. Daniel always kept it locked, saying it was where he developed his photographs and didn't want the chemicals disturbed. One afternoon, while he was out gathering wood, she found the key to the room hanging behind a loose plank near the fireplace. Curiosity pushed her forward. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. The desk was cluttered with maps, old film rolls, and a stack of weathered notebooks. A single drawer, carved from dark oak, caught her attention. It was locked tight. She searched until she found a small brass key taped beneath the underside of the desk. Her hands trembled as she turned it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Each photo showed a woman standing in front of the same cabin. Some smiled naturally, others looked uneasy. The more she flipped through, the more her stomach twisted. The backgrounds were identical, the same crooked pine tree, the same porch railing, the same cold smile on Daniel's face beside each woman. One picture made her gasp. It showed a necklace around a woman's neck, the exact silver chain Daniel had given her when she arrived. At the bottom of the drawer was a faded envelope filled with handwritten notes. Each contained a woman's name and a date. The most recent was from just 2 weeks before Clara had arrived. Panic surged through her as she realized what these photos might mean. She shoved everything back where she found it, locked the drawer, and hurried out before Daniel returned. That night, she barely spoke during dinner, forcing herself to act normal. But as Daniel's eyes lingered on her longer than usual, she wondered if he already knew what she had seen. The following evening, the air around the cabin felt heavier than usual. Daniel came home later than expected, his clothes damp and streaked with mud. He said little as he dropped his backpack by the door. Clara watched him from across the room, her heart pounding, trying to hide her fear. When he went to wash up, she noticed something dark under his fingernails and the faint smell of earth clinging to him. During dinner, he spoke in short sentences, his voice flat, his eyes distant. Every scrape of his fork against the plate made her flinch. The discovery in the drawer haunted her, but she knew confronting him could be dangerous. Still, her trembling voice betrayed her curiosity. She mentioned finding old photographs while cleaning. Daniel stopped chewing. The silence stretched too long before he finally looked up, his expression unreadable. He didn't deny it, nor did he explain. Instead, he stood, cleared his plate, and walked outside without a word. Through the window, Clara saw him standing in the snow, staring into the woods as if he was listening to something only he could hear. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His boots and coat were missing, but his truck remained parked outside. Hours passed, and he didn't return. Clara felt both relief and terror. The isolation that had once frightened her now seemed like her only chance. She gathered what little she could, her passport, some cash, a flashlight, and left the cabin, heart racing. The cold air burned her lungs as she moved quickly down the narrow trail, following what looked like faint tire tracks. Behind her, the wind carried the sound of creaking branches. Every noise made her jump. She didn't know where the road led, but she knew staying meant she would never leave alive. The forest seemed endless, stretching in every direction with no sign of civilization. Clara's hands were numb, her breath sharp and uneven in the freezing air. She followed the narrow path as best she could, hoping it would lead to a road or a house. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, the silence around her broken only by the crunch of snow beneath her boots. Every so often, she glanced back, terrified of what might be following her. The trees loomed tall and close, their branches bending under the weight of ice like silent witnesses to her fear. As daylight began to fade, Clara saw movement ahead, a flicker of motion between the trees. Relief flooded her when she spotted a man standing in a small clearing. He was dressed in a thick plaid jacket, his back turned as he dug into the frozen ground with a shovel. She thought he might be a hiker or a ranger. But as he shifted, the sinking light revealed his face. It was Daniel. Her breath caught in her throat. She dropped to the ground, hiding behind a fallen tree trunk. Peering through the branches, she watched him dig deeper. The sound of metal striking earth echoed through the forest. After a few minutes, he pulled something from his bag, a torn piece of fabric, white and faded. He dropped it into the hole, then covered it with dirt. Clara's eyes widened when she recognized the fabric pattern. It looked like a dress, the same one she had worn on her first day in Canada. Her hands shook as she tried to stay quiet, her mind racing. She realized then that Daniel hadn't left her behind. He was preparing for something. The grave wasn't old. It was waiting for someone, and that someone was her. Clara ran before she could think, her feet slipping over the frozen ground as branches whipped at her face. The sharp air tore through her lungs, but fear kept her moving. Behind her, she heard Daniel shout her name. At first, it was calm, almost gentle, as if he were coaxing her back. Then his voice changed, harder, sharper, echoing through the trees like a warning. The sound of his boots crunching over the snow grew louder, closer. She didn't dare look back. Her only thought was escape. The forest thickened, branches closing in like skeletal hands. Clara stumbled over roots, catching herself against the rough bark of a pine. Her heart pounded so hard it drowned out every other sound. She saw a slope ahead and climbed desperately, using her hands to grip the frozen rocks. Halfway up, her foot slipped, sending her tumbling down. Pain shot through her arm as she hit the ground, but she forced herself up again. She could hear Daniel's breathing now, steady and controlled. In the distance, she spotted a narrow opening in the rock, a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. She crawled inside, pressing herself against the cold stone. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Daniel's footsteps stopped nearby. She could hear him breathing just outside. The silence was unbearable. Then, slowly, his footsteps began to move away, fading into the distance. Clara waited, afraid to move or even breathe. Hours passed before she dared to crawl out. The forest was dark, moonlight glinting off the snow. Her body ached, and her clothes were torn, but she was alive. The night was still, yet every shadow felt alive with danger. Somewhere beyond the trees, Daniel was still out there, hunting, patient, and waiting. By dawn, Clara's legs were trembling from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The cold bit into her skin as she pushed forward, following what looked like an animal trail through the trees. The faint light of morning painted the forest in shades of gray, revealing broken branches and distant mountains. Her lips were dry, her fingers numb, yet the thought of Daniel lurking somewhere behind her kept her moving. Hours later, she stumbled upon a narrow dirt road, its surface partly frozen but marked by tire tracks. Hope surged through her chest. She followed it, her footsteps uneven, until she saw a small wooden sign, evidence of human life. As she rounded a bend, a green vehicle came into view. It was a park ranger's truck, parked beside a trailhead. Clara waved frantically, her voice cracking as she called for help. The ranger stepped out, startled by her appearance, frostbitten, pale, and trembling. Within minutes, he radioed for assistance. When the police arrived, Clara could barely speak, her words tangled with fear. They wrapped her in a blanket and gave her warm tea as she tried to explain. A search team was immediately dispatched to the cabin. What they found sent a chill through everyone present. The cabin was deserted, but the ground behind it was disturbed. As officers dug through the frozen soil, they uncovered shallow graves, each containing the remains of a different woman. Nearby, they found a camera bag filled with photographs and a list of names, one of them being Clara Mendoza. Daniel Whitmore had vanished, leaving behind his truck, his tools, and a trail of horror buried beneath the snow. The officers scoured the woods for days, but he was gone, as if the forest itself had swallowed him whole. Investigators began piecing together Daniel Whitmore's life, but what they uncovered didn't match the man Clara thought she knew. He wasn't a photographer at all. The identity he had shown her, complete with a website, social media pages, and a fake portfolio, was built on lies. His real name was uncertain. He had used several aliases across dating platforms, targeting women from different countries. The pattern was chilling. Each woman had fallen for the same story, a kind, artistic Canadian man seeking love and companionship. Each one had traveled to Canada to be with him. None had ever returned home. The authorities found connections to missing person reports from as far as the Philippines, Thailand, and Eastern Europe. Every victim shared a similar background: young, hopeful, and willing to take a chance on a promise of a better life. The cabin in the mountains had been rented under false documents, and the land surrounding it had no official owner listed. Investigators believed Daniel used it as a secluded hunting ground, choosing women who could easily vanish without raising suspicion. For months, police searched remote parts of British Columbia, chasing tips and reported sightings. Once, a hiker claimed to have seen a man resembling Daniel near an abandoned mining site, but by the time officers arrived, there was no trace. Interpol issued a global alert, and media outlets dubbed him the Phantom Fiancé. Clara's story became central to the investigation. Her escape provided the only first-hand account of his behavior. Yet, even with all the evidence, Daniel's real identity remained elusive. It was as if he had erased himself completely. Clara's survival was hailed as a miracle, but to her, it felt like unfinished punishment. She had escaped the mountains, but she knew he was still out there, watching, waiting for the next one. A year after her escape, Clara returned to the mountains with a small documentary crew determined to share her story. The journey back felt surreal, every turn in the road awakening memories she had tried to bury. The cabin was gone, reduced to a blackened patch of earth surrounded by regrown weeds. Local authorities claimed it had burned down in a mysterious fire months after the investigation ended, though no one could say how it started. Clara stood silently where the front steps once were, her breath visible in the cold air, the forest around her unnervingly quiet. The cameras captured her as she walked along the perimeter, pointing out where she had first seen the photographs, where she had fled into the trees, and where she believed Daniel had dug the graves. Every spot seemed haunted by echoes of the past. The crew spoke in hushed tones, the air thick with unease. Clara placed a bouquet of white lilies on the ground, whispering a short prayer for the women who had never made it home. For a moment, she thought she heard something, branches snapping, a soft crunch of snow, but when she turned, there was nothing. As the team began packing their equipment, the cameraman noticed something glinting in the dirt near the base of a tree. Clara bent down and picked it up. It was a silver necklace, identical to the one Daniel had given her. Her pulse quickened, memories rushing back like a flood. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, the forest closing in once more. She handed the necklace to the crew, forcing a calm smile, but her hands trembled. The documentary would later end with that image. Clara looking over her shoulder, her eyes filled with fear, as the wind whispered through the mountains once again.